As a STEM for Good facilitator, there are two primary resources that you will use during your volunteer experience. The first is the slide deck, which we'll talk about in just a moment. The second is your facilitator's guide, which is the step-by-step instructions on how to lead kids through the activities. As we click into the facilitator's guide, you'll see that there's a table of contents outlining where to find each session within the facilitator's guide. There's an activity map that gives you a snapshot of what each session will look like. And then it dives into the actual session. Each week will begin with an overview page similar to the one you see here, with instructions on how to best prepare for the session, as well as an overview of what to expect during the session. For example, with this facilitator preparation, it says that 2 weeks before, you'll need to complete your background check through the district's website. 1 week before, you'll want to review this facilitator's guide and the slides for this week. Then you want to complete your volunteer introduction slide and email it to your school host. And also, if this is your first time or you haven't done this in a while, or it's your first time in front of a group of students, we have a facilitator's tip sheet that might be useful to you. On the day of your volunteer experience, you want to arrive on time and sign in with the front office. The front office staff will help you find out where you need to go if you just tell them that you're there for STEM Club with whomever your school host is. You will also have 15 minutes to set up before the session begins. That is built into your volunteer call time. So you want to gather the supplies from the supply box in accordance with the materials chart, which I'll show you in a moment. You want to make sure that the desks are conducive to group work, and also just make sure that the projector and the videos are working. Your school host will be able to support you at this point. Since this is a STEM program, there are certain materials and supplies that are needed. You'll find the supply chart and materials chart on this page. You'll see the materials are outlined with a checkbox on which ones you need for each week. So within your first 15 minutes during setup, you'll want to go through this box and pull out the materials that are checked for each week. Please be sure to note the print materials at the bottom of the page. Once everything is set up and the kiddos are ready to begin the session, as well as yourself, you actually will dive into the session. So you'll notice, as we're looking at the facilitator's guide on the right and the slide deck on the left, that the two resources communicate with each other. So, for example, you'll see that we should be on slide 2, getting started. So if I click here to slide 2, it says getting started. So the facilitator's guide and the slide deck communicate with each other so that you can be on par with where you are in pacing for the session itself. You'll notice that there are flow and facilitator's notes on the left, just things to know or say or consider as a facilitator. And then there's a script on the right. So the script is here as an added resource just in case you're a little nervous, or again, if this is your first time doing this, but by no means do you need to read the script exactly. The script is meant to be there as a support, not as the end-all be-all. However, if you benefit from reading the script, that's totally fine. I do still recommend that you read through the session ahead of time. That way, if you need to go off script or you can, you have that ability to do so. So I would just like to take some time to go through week 1 together. So you'll see that the first thing that the kiddos will do in week 1 is an icebreaker. Some of these kids may know each other and some of them may not. Since STEM for Good spans the grade bands of grades 3 through 5, there is a chance that the kiddos in the room might not know each other. So this is a great opportunity for them to get to know one another, as well as for you to get to know them. One of the first things you're going to want to do as a facilitator is try to learn everyone's names to the best of your ability. They will, of course, have name tags, so that should help, but the icebreaker is another great way for you to get to know the students in the space. So the students will complete an icebreaker called Common Ground that will happen in stages. So they'll get into pairs, find something they have in common, then those pairs will form a group of 4 and find another thing that they all have in common, again with a group of 8, and then as a whole group. And this is all detailed in the facilitator's guide as well. Once the icebreaker is done, it is ready to officially begin this session by reading through the agenda. I would take this time just to highlight that if a student or if there's words on a slide, a student can read them. So give yourself a break, put the onus on the student to take ownership of their learning experience. And so what you can say, as it says here in the facilitator's guide, is you can ask a student to read the agenda aloud to the group. As we dive into session 1, you'll see that we're on slide 6, what is a port? So the first thing that we're going to be talking to kids about is what is a port and why are they important? What are the different types of ports? After that, they'll watch a short video that's about 4 minutes long on how ports operate. This will help them take it from the theoretical to more practical. After the students watch the video, they'll have a quick debrief on slide 7. One other thing I'd like to point out is that in the facilitator's guide, there are some facilitator's tips. So again, we do have our facilitator's tip sheet, which is linked in the overview page as well as right here. But for example, if you're asking one of these debrief questions and you're getting crickets, right? The students aren't engaging, no one's really answering the question. This doesn't happen often, but occasionally it does. And so one tip for kind of solving for that is to set an expectation. Sometimes if you just say, hey, can I hear from one person on the left side of the room? Or can I hear from 2 different voices? Sometimes just setting an expectation allows the students to meet you where you need them to be. Moving forward, after they've debriefed from the video, they will understand where ports exist within our state. Many students won't either know what a port is or maybe understand it from the perspective of they've seen ships or they've been to an airport. But what we really want to hit home is that ports exist throughout our state and that there are actually 75 ports within the state of Washington. So ports are a massive part of our life, and so we want kids to help understand the importance of the ports throughout the state of Washington. Next, they'll talk about ports in the environment, right? Ports are really busy places and that can affect nature. And so we want to talk about that, especially when we have a program called STEM for Good, where we're thinking about how we use STEM skills to do good in our community. Thinking about the impact of the work that we do on both people as well as the environment is a really important piece of that puzzle. And again, you'll note a facilitator's tip in here as well, which is, again, if you need a break, if there's words on a slide, students can read them. So encouraging the use of the popcorn method, where one student will read one section of the slide, maybe about keeping water clean, and then they will choose another student to read about reducing air pollution, aloud for the group. Again, this just really gives you a chance to take a break and learn a little bit about the students that are in the room based on who chooses whom and just the dynamic between the students. After they talk about the ports in the environment, they learn about a little bit of the people of the port. Now, the people of the port is going to be the main topic for week 2, so we don't dive into this too much, but this is just meant to serve as a transition to get students into their own groups. So we liken the port to and how ports operate to sports teams. That takes a lot of players to achieve a goal. Once the students understand that concept, they'll have a chance to actually create their own teams, where they will be completing their first challenge, which is building a ship in a bottle. So the first big thing that they'll do is that they'll choose their team name and their materials manager. So the reason we have one student selected as the materials manager, meaning the person that will come up and get the supplies from the materials table, the ones that you've pulled out of the supply kit, is just to streamline things and make it a little bit easier. That way you have maybe 4 to 6 kids coming up to the materials table instead of all 25. It just helps things move a little bit more smoothly. So the students will choose their team name, they will choose who the materials manager is, and this is also where their student journal comes into play. So again, all of the resources that we provide for you communicate with each other. So you'll notice that in the facilitator's guide, it says, hey, you're on slide 12, it's entitled this, and also the students are in their Explorer guide or their journal, and they need to be focusing on the front cover. Looking over at the slide deck says, okay, we are in fact on slide 12, it's called this, and it's also prompting the students that they should be looking at the front of their Explorer guide. Now, to show you a little bit about what the Explorer guide looks like, I have the copy right here. So this is the front cover, and this is what they should be focusing on. They should write their full name here at the top, and then once they decide on their group name, they'll put it here. Moving right along, once they've decided on their team name and who their materials manager is going to be, they will create their crew's code. So this is essentially a very loose contract between the kids that will help things move along these are kiddos who maybe this is going to be their first big experience with working in teams to create something or to solve a problem. And so we just want to set some ground rules. Again, you'll notice that we're on slide 13 per the facilitator's guide, and also that the students are on page 1 of their Explorer guide, which will look like this. So week 1 only uses this page, but you'll notice that there are 3 key sections, which we'll talk about. For this section, we're talking about the crew code, so things that everyone in the group should know or do. This can be really helpful for you as a facilitator because chances are one of the things that they're going to agree on is that everyone should take turns or everyone should be respectful. And so if you or the school host notice that maybe some students aren't following that rule, that agreement, we can reference back to the crew's code and just help things move along a little bit more smoothly in helping these kiddos learn how to effectively collaborate with one another. Once they decide on their crew's code and jot down some thoughts, and you can do this as a whole group activity, it's time for a movement break, right? We want the kiddos to have a chance to get up, move around. They've been sitting in their seats for a while, and so this is just a really simple movement break that is port themed to just get them up, moving, get the blood flowing, and help them in case they're a little bit antsy. You're more than welcome to join in. After the movement break, we dive into our first big STEM challenge. So this is where the students are going to put their teamwork to the test. And what they're going to be creating is a ship in a bottle. As part of this, they'll be using the design process, which is our version of the engineering design process. Again, this information is located on page 1 of their Explorer guide, as well as, of course, on slide 16. So you'll be walking the students through the design process, but they're going to learn it in the practical sense. So you'll do a quick overview by saying, all right, let's read through the steps. So you'll point to the green, and everyone will say, empathize and ask. You'll point to the pink, everyone will say, imagine and plan, and so on. So you're not diving too far into the design process at this stage, because again, they're going to learn it practically throughout the first activity. But something that you might want to hit home is why this resource is important, why it's important for folks who are in STEM fields and just in general to have a tool, to have a methodology that can help achieve goals and solve problems. So with that, we will dive into this first challenge, and we will dive also into the first step of the design process, which is empathize and ask. So the first thing that we want to ask the kids is to define empathy. What does that mean? And why is it important when we're talking about engineering and solving problems? There are some guiding questions here that the students will answer within their groups. And then we move into a discussion around the science side of this concept of the ship in a bottle buoyancy challenge. So we'll start with a brainstorm. What things float and what materials sink? They'll have some space in their Explorer guide to jot that down. From here, we'll start diving into the scientific concepts. So again, if there are words on a slide, then the kids can read them. So by all means, do feel free to have the kiddos read aloud what buoyancy means. So there's a simple description here. And then we talk about the scientific concepts of density and displacement and why this is important to engineers and within the challenge that we're facing. From there, we start to narrow in on the challenge ahead of us, which is the ship in a bottle. So the kiddos will be using 3D printed boats in order to create their ship in a bottle. So we'll talk about the materials there and what that means as it relates to density and displacement. So you will see here that this is what the final product will look like once the students have completed their ship in a bottle. And again, they'll be completing 1 ship in a bottle per group. This is to help them work through challenges as a team, learn a little bit more about their team dynamic, because they will be working with the same students each week. We'll also be highlighting the scientific concepts we covered around density and displacement. Next, we're going to talk even more about teamwork and why it matters and how they're going to be creating their ship in a bottle. After that, the materials manager, again, that 1 student representative from each group who will be designated with a lanyard that says materials manager on it, will come up to the materials table and grab the supplies needed to make the ship in a bottle. From there, we'll be rotating clockwise. So all group members will need to wear gloves. There are both child-sized gloves and adult-sized gloves for you all inside of the supply kit. Everyone will adorn their gloves, and the group member to the right, or clockwise of the materials manager, will be the first person to take action. So the first thing that they'll be doing is preparing their workspace. There are slides in here to prompt when it's time for them to switch, and another person will take on the action so that everyone gets a turn participating. And so the next few slides and pages in the facilitator's guide walk through how to complete the buoyancy challenge. I'll go through it at a high level, but again, I do recommend that you just kind of click through the facilitator's guide and the slide deck before the first session. So what the kids will do is they will receive a screwdriver, and the 3D printed boat from the materials manager, and they will need to install this screw. I should note that sometimes this task can get a little tricky. They are screwing into plastic, and sometimes they might need to push a little bit harder for that. So feel free to prompt students, as it says here, to ask for help, either from a grown-up, aka yourself, or any co-volunteers or the school host, or even a team member if they're struggling with this step. From there, there's a small little debrief around why we did that, how the screw helps in terms of keeping the ship upright, and again, thinking about density displacement. The metal in the screw is heavier, so it keeps the boat balanced. Then they'll switch again. From there, they'll be going to be testing the two liquids that we will be using. One liquid is glycerin, which is dense, and one is baby oil, which is less dense. So they'll switch. And then after the previous member would have tested liquid A, this student will be testing liquid B. And they'll be comparing what happens, what their observations are in terms of what happens to the boat in liquid A versus in liquid B. Again, just making some more notes on what the difference is here and what they notice. So this is kind of the explanation of what's happening and what they're seeing before them. And again, this is all shown in the facilitator's guide slide by slide. Moving into slide 31, we talk about immiscible liquids and making sure kids understand that term, that there are some liquids and substances that just don't like each other, so they don't mix. After that, they will move into mixing the dye. So we talk about that we are simulating an ocean. So we're turning the glycerin blue. There is a little vial of blue dye as well as a pipette or two in the supply kit. Please note, as it says here in the facilitator's guide, that only you or your co-volunteer, your school host, should be the one to add the blue dye. There's only one vial in there, so it is a very finite resource. So we just want to be mindful, and also it will stain clothing, it will stain skin. So making sure that you're the one that is dropping 2 to 3 drops of that blue dye into the glycerin is really important. From there, the kiddos will add the blue glycerin into the plastic bottle, and then add the ship on top, as well as the baby oil on top of that to create that multi-tiered ship in a bottle. There is a funnel included with the supply kit, that way to help mitigate messes, but there's also a stack of paper towels and some alcohol wipes as well to help clean up any spills. And then from there, they'll be sealing their bottle tightly. As it says here in big, bold, scary red letters, they should make sure that you can come around, you or a co-volunteer or a school host can come around and just confirm that the lid is screwed really tight. The kids are going to be shaking the bottles after this, and so we just want to make sure that the bottles are sealed tightly to avoid any big messes. After everything's sealed tightly, they'll be simulating a storm. Like I said, they'll be shaking the bottles to be able to observe what happens to the boat. Really what we want them to understand from this lesson is that those immiscible liquids really do not mix. So they will separate after so much time waiting or after so much time has passed, and that the density and the displacement that are those forces that are impacting the boat will move the ship to the middle of the bottle where it will stay. After this activity, of course, they're shaking the bottle. They're going to be super jazzed about it and excited. So it might be hard to get their attention afterwards. Let them get their wiggles out. Let them be excited. But there is a tip here in the facilitator's guide that on tips and tricks on how to get students' attention, even after they've completely, completely lost them because they're so excited. So I definitely recommend paying attention to that tips section. From here, and again, just a reminder that we are moving throughout the design process here, so they will have a quick discussion on improving and if there's anything that they would do differently should they try this challenge again. You can spend some time here if you have the time and the students can answer the questions aloud or within their groups, but if you're short on time, that's totally fine. We're going to dive more into these particular steps later in the sessions. After that, there's share, which I always like to do. This is just a think, pair, share, where they turn to their partner and share one thought they have about these questions. Again, if you're short on time, you can just kind of read these questions aloud and move forward. And that's it. That is the end of the first session. There's closing and dismissal after that. So just making sure that the kids are cleaning up their areas, that the classroom is in the same state as when you walked in. And then the school host will help with dismissal to ensure that each student goes home with the correct caregiver. And that is, in summary, what session 1 looks like, or week 1 looks like, and how to use the facilitator's guide, the slide deck, and how the students will use their Explorer guide throughout the session.